Driven by the manipulative words of another woman, Vance Sterling kicked his wife out of his car. Clara stepped out into a freezing, unforgiving nor'easter, but barely 2 hours later, when he returned, he encountered a scene that crushed his chest. It was not just the overwhelming terror of thinking his wife might have died. It was also a blind, devastating wave of jealousy upon discovering she had gotten into the Bentley of an unknown man. A woman who had once given up her dreams for love was now choosing to walk away to find herself again. Her 3-year marriage ended not because of infidelity, but because a man completely ignored the wounded heart of a woman. Let us follow Clara's journey, from a discarded wife to Alara, the brilliant fine fiber artist who managed to bring the entire art world to its knees. The rhythmic sound of the windshield wipers on the Porsche Cayenne seemed useless, fighting desperately to push away the curtain of white rain, battering the glass. The night was as dark as ink, barely interrupted by cold flashes of lightning that fleetingly illuminated the slick and desolate Interstate 95. The atmosphere inside the vehicle was suffocating. The silence was so tense it felt ready to shatter. Clara Sterling remained huddled in the passenger seat, both hands gripping the designer handbag resting on her lap. She kept quiet, not because she had nothing to say, but because she knew any word she spoke in that moment would be completely useless. Suddenly, the phone resting on Vance's center console vibrated violently, breaking that deadly silence. The screen lit up with 2 words, Sienna Brooks. Without the slightest hesitation, Vance answered the call and put it on speaker. His voice, normally cold, softened immediately. Sienna, what is wrong? From the other side came a soft cough, followed by the weak, pitiful voice of the actress. Vance, I am so sorry to bother you at this hour. I have a terrible fever, and I do not have a single pill left in the house. I am so scared. Her voice cracked. She was breathing heavily, as if speaking a single sentence drained all her strength. Clara instinctively clutched her handbag. It was the same scene as always. Vance frowned as he gripped the steering wheel. Stay right where you are. Do not go anywhere. I am on my way. No, there is no need, Sienna replied quickly, though her tone was heavy with expectation. I do not want to bother you or your wife. You are surely together. I can call a cab and go to the hospital. Those words acted like a lit match thrown into a powder keg. Vance turned his head and shot a glaring look at Clara. The softness vanished from his eyes instantly, replaced by cold disdain. I said I am on my way. Wait for me. And he hung up without giving her a chance to respond. Clara took a deep breath, trying to keep her composure. Vance, there is a massive storm outside. Have you seen the weather advisories? They recommended no one drive. The interstate is extremely dangerous. Oh, right, he scoffed with a smile devoid of any warmth. To you, it does not matter that Sienna has a fever and is about to pass out. I did not mean that, Clara replied warily. She can call her assistant or a medical service. Driving in this weather is putting your life at risk. Clara, when are you going to stop being so selfish and jealous? His voice roared over the noise of the rain hitting the windows. Sienna is completely alone. She is not strong, and she does not have a support network of people like you do. She needs me. Clara's heart shrank. She needed him. During their 3 years of marriage, she had never dared to bother him for something as simple as an illness. Even when she had a high fever and was delirious in the middle of the night, she simply took some medicine and cried herself to sleep. She did it because she knew he was busy, because she knew he was tired, and because she was terrified of becoming a burden. Turn the car around, she said, her voice trembling. Let us go home. Whatever is happening can wait until tomorrow. Let us go back. Vance let out a laugh full of contempt. For what? To listen to your lectures? To look at that miserable face? Clara, do you have any idea how insufferable you are? The car abruptly decelerated. The screech of the brakes pierced the roar of the storm. Vance aggressively parked the Porsche on the emergency shoulder. He turned to her. His gaze was as sharp as a blade and as cold as ice. You want to go home? Perfect. He reached out and pressed the unlock button. Get out! Clara froze. She could not believe what she had just heard. What did you say? I said get out of my car. Vance practically roared. All his patience had vanished. You wanted to go home. Then go back alone. When you learn to behave and reason like a rational adult, you can come back to that house. Tears filled Clara's eyes, but she forced herself to hold them back. She looked deeply into the eyes of the man who had once promised her the world, the man for whom she abandoned her career and her passion to build a family. And in those eyes, she found only cruelty and disdain. In that instant, Her heart shattered into pieces. She did not say another word. Trying to explain herself or cling to him had become ridiculous. Slowly, she unbuckled her seatbelt. Her hands shook from the cold as she opened the door. The freezing wind and biting rain rushed into the vehicle. Seeing her step out, her slender figure shivering under the storm, a brief hesitation crossed Vance's mind, but it was quickly crushed by his anger. He grabbed an umbrella from the back seat and threw it outside. The umbrella landed on the wet asphalt a few feet away from her, a humiliating display of charity. Do not let anyone see you looking so pitiful. It is an embarrassment to the Sterling family. After saying that, he did not look at her again. The door slammed shut. The Porsche roared and disappeared into the rain. Clara was left completely alone in the vastness of the interstate. Trapped between the fury of nature and the coldness of human beings, she stood motionless. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the freezing rain trailing down her pale cheeks. She did not even pick up the umbrella. She simply stood there, allowing the storm to unleash all its force upon her, as if she wanted that rain to wash away every sacrifice and every mistake she had made over the last 3 years. Only one thought remained in her mind. It was all over. It was truly over. The dark blue Porsche sped through the rain. Vance watched in the rearview mirror until Clara's silhouette completely vanished into the white curtain of water. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to stifle a strange sense of unease that was beginning to grow inside him. She brought this upon herself, he thought, annoyed. He convinced himself he was doing the right thing. Clara needed a lesson. She had become too spoiled, selfish, and irrational. A little suffering would make her understand her place. Thinking that, he pressed the accelerator and continued toward the luxury high-rise in Tribeca where Sienna Brooks lived. The instant the apartment door opened, a delicate body fell into his arms. Sienna was wearing a semi-transparent silk nightgown. Her long hair rested on her shoulders. Her face was pale, and her large, damp eyes looked incredibly vulnerable. "Vance, you finally arrived. I was so scared." Vance hugged her and felt the heat of the fever on her body. The guilt he had felt for Clara instantly vanished, replaced by compassion for the woman he held in his arms. He helped her sit on the sofa. "Did you take any medicine?" "I managed to find a fever reducer and took a pill," Sienna replied softly while looking at him with gratitude. "Thank you, Vance. I do not know what I would do without you. Your wife must be very angry with you, right? This is all my fault for bothering you both at this hour." She spoke with apparent guilt, but every word was like throwing fuel on a fire. She subtly reminded him of Clara's behavior while reinforcing the importance he held for her. Vance did not answer. He went to the kitchen and poured her a glass of warm water. "Rest. I am here now." Sienna nodded obediently. She rested her head on his shoulder and coughed softly. "Are you hungry? Let me make you some soup." "I am sorry, my refrigerator is empty. I can only make something simple." "There is no need. You are sick. It does not matter," she smiled weakly. "Cooking for you makes me happy." Watching Sienna's sweet and understanding attitude, Vance could not help but compare it to the stubbornness he had seen in Clara just hours before. He sighed and let her head to the kitchen. Time passed slowly. Outside, the rain showed no signs of slowing down. On the contrary, it fell harder with each passing minute. Thunder rumbled relentlessly. Vance sat in front of the television. A news program occupied the screen, but he was unable to focus. The image of Clara standing alone in the storm kept flashing in his mind. Her soaked dress, her hair plastered to her face, her eyes full of empty despair. The interstate was already deserted at night, and even more so during such a storm. An out-of-control semi-truck, a drunk driver, a sudden accident. Those terrifying thoughts struck his mind and tightened his chest. He shook his head forcefully. Nothing was going to happen to her. She was on the shoulder. She could call her friends. She could order a rideshare. She was not a child. Sienna returned with a steaming bowl of soup. The aroma spread through the room. "Vance, have some to warm up. You were out in the rain. You could catch a cold." Vance took the spoon and tasted a bite. The soup was incredibly bland. It could not compare to the meals Clara prepared. Even the simplest of her broths had flavor and warmth. "What is wrong?" Sienna asked worriedly. "Is it bad?" "No. It is delicious," he lied, forcing himself to eat a few more bites before setting the bowl aside. "You should eat something and go to sleep early." He glanced at his Rolex. Almost an hour had passed since he abandoned Clara. The unease inside him kept growing. He picked up his phone. Instinctively, he wanted to call her, but he set it back down on the table. His pride would not allow it. He had kicked her out of the car. Calling her now would be admitting he was wrong. Besides, she was probably already safe at home. She was surely angry and crying, but at least she was safe. Sienna seemed to notice his distraction. She clung to his arm and spoke in a petulant voice. "Do not worry about your wife anymore. She is strong. I am sure she is fine. She is just causing drama. Tomorrow everything will be back to normal. Stay with me tonight, Vance. I am afraid to be alone." But Sienna's words, assuring him that everything would return to normal the next day, did not comfort Vance at all. On the contrary, they provoked a profound discomfort. Yes, it had always been like that. They would argue, he would get angry, she would endure everything in silence, and the next morning she would prepare breakfast as if nothing had happened. Her submission had become a habit, a reality he took for granted. But Clara's eyes tonight had not been like always. There was no pain, no desperation to hold on to him. There was only the stillness of extinguished ashes. The clock moved forward another hour. 2 hours had passed. 2 hours lived in a hell of anxiety and torment. Suddenly, the news broadcast was interrupted by an emergency bulletin due to the severe weather. Visibility is extremely low. On Interstate 95 northbound, a massive multi-vehicle collision has just occurred involving 3 freight trucks and 2 passenger vehicles. Rescue operations are facing enormous difficulties. Vance's heart felt as if it had been thrown into an icebox. The accident had occurred on the exact stretch of highway he had just driven through. Unable to wait a single second longer, he leaped to his feet and grabbed his bespoke Tom Ford coat. "Where are you going, Vance?" Sienna panicked and grabbed his arm. "Let go of me." Vance brushed her hand away roughly. His voice was cold and urgent. "I have to go back there." "No, it is too dangerous." Sienna clung to him as tears filled her eyes. "Do not go. I am scared. She is an adult. She can take care of herself. What if something happens to you?" The selfishness she displayed in that moment filled Vance with a sudden revulsion. He pushed her away harshly. His eyes were entirely devoid of compassion. "I will say it one more time. Let go of me." Realizing she could not stop him, Sienna changed her strategy instantly. Okay. Do not be angry. I will go with you. I am worried about her too." Vance had no time to argue. He sprinted out of the apartment, and Sienna quickly grabbed her coat to follow him. Inside, satisfaction and a slight fear mixed within her. She wanted to see with her own eyes the miserable state Clara was in. The engine roared as the car turned around and plunged back into the storm. Vance slammed the accelerator to the floor. There was only one prayer in his mind. "Clara, please, you have to be okay." Vance drove like a madman. The Porsche cut through the night, slicing the thick curtain of rain. The windshield wipers worked at maximum speed but seemed incapable of battling nature's fury. Inside the vehicle, the atmosphere was even more terrifying than the storm outside. Sienna sat in the passenger seat, gripping the seatbelt with both hands. Her beautiful face was pale with fear. She did not dare utter a single word, only shooting furtive glances at the man beside her. Vance's eyes remained locked on the road. He clenched his jaw so tightly that veins bulged on his forehead. His mind was a complete chaos of regret, anxiety, and an invisible dread suffocating his heart. Over and over, he tried to convince himself that nothing had happened. Clara was just angry. Maybe she had called a friend. Maybe she had gotten a cab. But the report of the multi-car pileup struck his mind like a giant hammer, shattering every one of his lies. "Vance, drive a little slower. It is too dangerous." Sienna finally could not contain herself. Her voice trembled. Vance did not answer. Nor did he even look at her. He simply accelerated more. He had only one goal: to get there as fast as possible and verify that Clara was safe. In the distance, the red and blue lights of state trooper cruisers and ambulances appeared. They glowed in the dark like ghostly fireflies. As they got closer, the scene grew increasingly chaotic. The police had closed off a long stretch of the interstate. Mangled vehicles lay scattered everywhere. Some were so deformed they were unrecognizable. Sirens tore through the silence of the night. Vance's heart sank. He was forced to stop the car at a distance, trapped behind a long line of immobilized vehicles. "Stay in the car," he ordered Sienna with a hoarse voice. Without waiting for an answer, he opened the door and sprinted out. The rain soaked him instantly. His expensive coat was ruined in seconds, but he did not care. He ran desperately toward the spot where he had left Clara. The wind roared in his ears. The rain battered his face, but nothing compared to the terror tearing at his chest. Clara! Clara! He yelled desperately. However, his voice was swallowed by the storm. Sienna also ran out, holding an umbrella. Vance! Wait! Be careful! But Vance heard nothing. He finally reached the exact spot. It was located just before the section blocked by the police. Fortunately, that area had not been directly struck by the pileup. However, what he saw in front of him sent an electric shock through his entire body. His legs froze. He stood absolutely still. On the wet asphalt, dimly lit by the headlights of stopped vehicles, stretched a long, black skid mark. It looked like a hideous scar carved into the highway, the silent evidence of a terrifying collision. Nearby, shards of plastic and scattered glass lay everywhere. They looked like the remains of a shattered headlight. But what made Vance completely collapse was a small object abandoned in a puddle, a beige designer heel. He recognized it instantly. It was the shoe Clara had worn tonight, the same one he had gifted her the year before for her birthday. She loved them. She always said they were incredibly comfortable. Now, one of those shoes rested there alone, soaked, with a broken strap, like a silent accusation against his cruelty, and against a tragic end he did not even dare to imagine. The whole world seemed to stop. The sound of the rain, the wind, the sirens, everything vanished. In his ears, there was only a constant ringing and the beating of his own heart, growing weaker, as if it were about to stop. He dropped to his knees. His trembling hand reached out to pick up the shoe. Freezing water and mud soaked his palm, and yet it felt like it burned like a glowing ember. No, it is impossible. His voice cracked. Impossible. Sienna caught up to him. Seeing the scene, she too grew pale. She covered her mouth with both hands. Her eyes widened in horror. But her horror was not for Clara. It was fear for herself. If Clara had truly died there right after arguing with Vance and being kicked out of the car, then she, who had indirectly caused all of this, would not escape the consequences either. Oh my God, Vance. How could this happen? Her voice trembled, mixed with feigned sobs. Clara, is she? Vance heard nothing. He gripped the shoe tightly as he stared blankly at the accident scene. Ambulances were still loading victims. What if she was there? What if Clara was inside one of those vehicles? Or worse. A wave of unprecedented despair and agony crashed over him, drowning him completely. What had he done? With his own hands, he had pushed the woman who loved him toward death. All out of selfishness, out of blindly trusting another woman. He had destroyed his own happiness. His face was gray. He had lost all color. Breathing became difficult, as if a massive boulder was crushing his chest. Vance slumped forward under the torrential rain, tears mixed with the water running down his face. For the first time in his entire life, the powerful CEO, the man who controlled the fate of thousands of people, felt completely defenseless, completely desperate. He had lost her. The freezing rain kept falling relentlessly, as if wanting to wash away all traces, but it could not erase the pain carved into Vance's soul. He remained kneeling, motionless as a stone statue, his hand clutching the cold high heel. Images of Clara flashed one after another, her gentle smile, her warm eyes, and that empty, silent gaze from tonight. It all shredded his conscience. Sienna stood beside him. The umbrella trembled in her hands. She wanted to step closer to comfort him, but seeing him turn to stone, she did not dare. The situation had spiraled completely out of her control. She only wanted to get Clara out of Vance's life, but not like this. Clara's death would become a ghost, one that would haunt Vance forever, and her as well. Vance, let us go to the hospital to ask, she babbled, trying to offer a solution. Sienna's words acted like a key, unlocking the prison of despair where Vance was trapped. Yes, the hospital. Maybe she was only injured. As long as she was still alive, he would do anything to save her. He shot to his feet. His reddened eyes gleamed with a fragile spark of hope. Without saying a word, he sprinted straight toward the police barricade. Hey, sir, you cannot go in there. It is dangerous. A young state trooper stopped him immediately. My wife! My wife! Vance grabbed the officer's shoulders. He roared like a wounded beast. She was here. 2 hours ago. She was exactly here. Tell me, where is she? The young trooper was startled. He tried to stay calm. Sir, this is still an active rescue zone. Please step back so we can work. If you are looking for a family member, you can file a report at the nearest precinct. I am not going anywhere. Vance had lost all rationality. He showed him the shoe. This is her shoe. She was wearing a light blue dress, Long hair, slender. Is she among the victims? Tell me. The sheer desperation and agony in his voice made the young trooper soften a bit. He looked at an older colleague standing nearby. The veteran walked over, observed Vance, then looked at the skid marks and scattered debris. You say your wife was here about 2 hours ago? He asked calmly. Yes, exactly here, Vance replied, like a man clinging to a life preserver in the middle of the ocean. The officer frowned, thought for a few seconds, and then his eyes lit up. Ah, now I remember. Those words hung over Vance's head like a sentence. His heart stopped, waiting for the final verdict. There was a woman like that, the trooper continued. She looked like she was having a terrible time. She was completely soaked and alone in the rain. My partner and I were going to pull over to help her, but we did not make it in time. What do you mean you did not make it in time? Vance asked in desperation. The officer said, because she got very lucky. Right at that moment, a black Bentley pulled up. A man stepped out of the vehicle, handed her an umbrella, and invited her inside. They had barely been gone for a few minutes when this terrible accident happened right behind them. A black Bentley. That information hit Vance like an electric shock. It shattered his despair and simultaneously dealt him another devastating blow. Clara was alive. She had not been involved in the accident. She was alive. A sense of relief so intense washed over Vance that his legs lost all strength. He nearly collapsed again. He had to hold onto the guardrail to stay standing. He breathed heavily, inhaling the freezing air to try to control his racing heartbeat. He felt like he had just returned from the gates of hell. Sienna, who was standing behind him, heard the entire conversation. She too let out a sigh of relief. Clara had not died. That was good. There was still a way to fix things. But as soon as that wave of relief vanished, a much darker and more unpleasant emotion began to rise within Vance. A black Bentley. Another man. Right after arguing with her husband, right after being abandoned on the side of the highway, she had gotten into another man's car. And not just any man, someone driving a Bentley. The relief of knowing her alive was rapidly replaced by irrational jealousy and a searing fury. His pride had been severely wounded. He felt betrayed, even though he was obviously the one to blame. He was the one who had pushed her into that situation. But in that moment, within his mind, all the responsibility shifted onto her. Thank you, he replied dryly to the officer before turning around. His face no longer showed the desperation of a few minutes ago. It was now covered by a dark, terrifying expression. Cold, threatening. Sienna ran after him. Vance, Clara is fine. That is wonderful. Let us go home. You are completely soaked. Vance did not answer. He walked straight to the car, opened the door, and sat behind the wheel. Then he threw Clara's wet shoe onto the passenger seat, right where Sienna had been sitting. Sienna looked at the shoe, then looked at Vance's face, and a bad feeling settled in her chest. Vance gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. Only one question echoed over and over in his head. A question loaded with fury and possessiveness. Well done, Clara. You dared to get into another man's car? The pitch-black night seemed like a giant monster swallowing Clara's small figure. The rain continued to fall relentlessly. The freezing drops felt like thousands of needles piercing her skin, but she no longer felt the cold. Or perhaps the external cold could not compare to the ice freezing her heart. She walked aimlessly along the slippery emergency shoulder. The headlights of massive semi-trucks illuminated her body with blinding, cruel flashes. Horns blared constantly. Some drivers even shouted insults as they passed. They probably thought she was crazy or trying to kill herself. Clara smiled bitterly. Kill herself? She did not have the courage to do that. But she also did not know how to keep living. 3 years of her youth. 3 years of sacrifices. 3 years of enduring everything. And what had she received in return? Only a few words. Get out of my car. And being mercilessly abandoned in the middle of a storm. Vance Sterling. That name had once been her entire universe. The religion she worshipped. She had naively believed that if she loved him enough, if she was sweet and self-sacrificing enough, one day the ice around his heart would finally melt. But she was wrong. The ice never melted. On the contrary, it ended up freezing her own heart. The broken strap of her heel made her limp. Finally, she tripped over some debris on the road. She fell hard onto the freezing asphalt. The dirty rainwater instantly soaked her dress. The rough surface scraped the palms of her hands, but she did not try to get up. She simply stayed there, collapsed on the ground, allowing the bitter water to enter her eyes and mouth. Maybe it was for the best. letting the storm wash away all her stupidity, letting the cold numb the pain. Suddenly, a warm, but not blinding, light fell upon her. An elegant black Bentley had just pulled up beside her. The engine purred smoothly, vastly different from the roar of the trucks that had just passed. The door opened, and a tall man stepped out of the vehicle. He wore a perfectly tailored suit and held a large black umbrella. He walked over to her. The umbrella shielded her from the rain immediately. Clara looked up warily. The man's face was partially obscured by the shadows, but his eyes were bright, deep, serene, like an autumn lake. There was no pity or curiosity in them, only tranquility and a slight compassion. "Are you all right?" His voice was deep and pleasant, like a warm stream cutting through a frozen soul. Clara did not answer. She simply shook her head. All her energy had been drained. The man did not press the issue. He took off his suit jacket and draped it gently over her shoulders. The garment still held his body heat and gave off a delicate scent of cedarwood. Then he leaned down, slid one arm under her knees, the other around her back, and lifted her with ease. Clara's body tensed for a moment. How long had it been since someone had held her like that? Vance had carried her once too, but that had happened during the blurry night of their wedding. Driven by desire and possession, never with such tenderness, never with such respect. The man settled her into the passenger seat of the Bentley, then carefully buckled her seatbelt. He walked around the vehicle and took his place behind the wheel. The interior of the car immediately isolated them from the storm. He turned on the heater, and a pleasant warmth filled the cabin. "Where do you live? I will take you home," he asked, without taking his eyes off the road. Home. Clara let out a bitter, internal laugh. She had a house, that massive, cold estate in the Hamptons. That was not her home. It was Vance's house, and right now, there was probably another woman inside. Seeing her remain silent, the man did not insist. He took a soft towel and a bottle of water from the glove compartment. "Dry yourself off. Do not catch a cold." Clara accepted both things mechanically. When her fingers accidentally brushed his, she felt the warmth radiating from his hand. She lowered her head. Her wet hair soaked the expensive jacket. She wanted to thank him, but her throat was blocked by something bitter. She could not utter a single word. The car glided forward silently. Occasionally, the man glanced at her profile. He narrowed his eyes slightly, as if trying to recognize her. He remained quiet for a long time until he finally spoke. His voice sounded hesitant, unsure, but full of surprise. "Excuse me, are you Alara?" Clara's body shuddered violently. She snapped her head toward him, looking at him with wide eyes. Alara. It had been 3 years since anyone had called her that. Since the day she married Vance, that name had been buried along with her passion, along with her dreams, along with her true identity. Vance had told her once, "You are Clara Sterling. You are my wife, not some unknown fine fiber artist." And because of those words, she had given up everything. Why did this man, a complete stranger, know that name? Seeing her reaction, the man got the answer he was looking for. The doubt vanished from his gaze. It was replaced by sincere respect and deep regret. "So it really is you, the fine fiber artist Alara. 3 years ago, I saw your piece, Swans on the Lake of Time, at an art exhibition in Boston. It impressed me profoundly, but then you suddenly disappeared. The entire art world felt your absence." He spoke calmly, like someone recalling an old story. But every word struck Clara like a hammer, shattering the armor she had built around herself. The tears she had held back all night finally escaped. They fell freely, burning, heavy, but they were not tears for having been abandoned by her husband. They were tears of sorrow for herself, of regret. So there was still someone who remembered who she was. So what she had fought for had not been in vain. The man, Julian Hayes, said nothing more. He simply handed her a box of tissues. He did not ask why she was out there. He did not ask who had abandoned her. He just gave her the space she needed to confront her emotions. The courtesy and warmth of that stranger made her own husband's cruelty even more evident. A stranger respected her more than the man she had married. How ironic! The black Bentley cruised smoothly through the illuminated streets of New York, leaving the storm behind. He did not head toward bustling Midtown Manhattan. Instead, he turned into a quiet, historic neighborhood in Greenwich Village. There, classic brick townhouses stayed hidden behind ivy-covered walls. Finally, the car stopped in front of a large iron gate. Above it hung a plaque, Hayes Fine Art Gallery. Julian did not take her to a luxury hotel or a modern high-rise. He took her to his own private art space, a place that combined a gallery, a library, and a creative studio. "We have arrived," he said softly. "You can stay here tonight. The guest room is always ready." Clara had already stopped crying. Her eyes were still swollen, but her gaze was strangely calm and clear. She nodded in silence, without rejecting the invitation, without thanking him for it. She simply followed him inside. And the moment she crossed the doors, a completely different world appeared before her. It was not the empty ostentation of the Sterling estate. It was serene, refined elegance. There was an interior courtyard with a stone fountain, potted oak trees, and the air was steeped in the scent of old books and cedarwood, a fragrance that conveyed immense peace. Julian led her to a room on the second floor. The decor was simple but elegant. Natural wood, large windows, and views of the back garden. He pointed to a closet. "There are new clothes inside there. You can use them. The bathroom is right across the hall. Make yourself at home." With that said, he left, giving her absolute privacy. Clara stood in the middle of the room, feeling the silence, the warmth, and the tranquility of the place. Julian's thoughtfulness, caring for her without needing to interrogate her, only highlighted Vance's selfishness even more. A complete stranger treated her with more consideration than her own husband, the man who had discarded her, as if she were worthless. How ridiculous. She stepped into the shower. The hot water ran over her freezing body, but it could not warm her heart. She stared at herself in the mirror. Pale face, empty eyes, colorless lips. That was Clara Sterling. A beautiful title, but also a prison. A cage that had kept her locked away for 3 years. The young woman named Alara, the girl whose eyes sparkled with passion while she worked on her weaving looms, had died a long time ago. After changing into dry clothes, Clara did not go to bed. She sat by the window, watching the rain begin to taper off. Memories of her 3-year marriage played through her mind like a slow, vivid, painful movie. She remembered the first time she met Vance. He seemed like a man straight out of a novel, arrogant, cold, but irresistibly attractive. She fell in love at first sight. To be able to stay by his side, she pushed herself relentlessly. She learned to cook, she learned floral arrangement, she learned to become the perfect wife, the flawless spouse. She also remembered their wedding day. Vance had told her, "Clara, you just need to stay home and be a good wife. I will take care of everything else." In that moment, she naively believed it was a promise of protection. She never imagined those words would be a sentence that would strip away her freedom and her dreams. The day she packed away the antique weaving tools she had inherited from her mother, she felt something break inside her. That was her passion, her reason for living. But Vance had said, "All this textile stuff is a waste of time. It does not make real money. You do not need to work so hard." He never understood. That was not a job. It was not a way to make money. It was her soul. She remembered the countless nights she spent alone in that massive estate, waiting for him to return from social events. His clothes always carried the perfume of another woman. He never gave explanations, and she never dared to ask. She lied to herself. She told herself he was busy, that they were business meetings, that it was all part of his professional networking. She also remembered the arrival of Sienna Brooks. That woman always appeared weak and helpless. She always needed Vance to be by her side, and Vance always answered her call, regardless of the feelings of his lawful wife. Last night had been the final straw. Not only had he hurt her with his words, but he had committed the cruelest act of all. He had pushed her directly into danger because of a fake phone call from that woman. The warmth Julian had shown her tonight was like a ray of light illuminating a truth she had spent 3 years refusing to see. She was not loved. She was not respected. In Vance's eyes, she was probably nothing more than a beautiful ornament inside his mansion, an unpaid servant, a name written on a marriage certificate to satisfy his family. Her existence was so taken for granted that he had forgotten she was a person who felt pain, who could break. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Julian. He carried a steaming mug of chamomile tea. "Drink a little. It will help you warm up. It will also help you sleep." He placed the mug on the table and turned to leave. "Mr. Hayes." Clara spoke suddenly. Her voice was still hoarse, but it was also surprisingly firm. "Call me Julian." He turned to look at her. "Julian," she repeated. "Thank you." It was the first complete sentence she had spoken in front of him. "You do not have to thank me." Julian smiled slightly. It was a warm smile, without ulterior motives, hiding nothing. Clara took a deep breath. Can I stay here for a few days? I will pay my share of all expenses. She did not want to return to that place. At least not for now. Julian looked at her intently. He seemed to understand much more than she had said. You can stay as long as you need. The Hayes Fine Art Gallery will always have its doors open for an artist like Ilara. This is not a hotel. Let us not talk about money. After saying that, he withdrew silently, returning her tranquility. Clara picked up the mug. The heat slowly seeped into the palms of her hands, but she did not drink. She merely stared at her distorted reflection on the surface of the tea. She saw a strange woman, a woman who had lost herself for a love that did not deserve it. No, this could not continue. Ilara had to exist again, and for Ilara to live, the marriage between Clara and Vance had to end. A clear, definitive decision took shape within her. No more doubts, no more weakness. Her heart had died that night in the storm, and from those ashes a new, cold, unbreakable strength was being born. Dawn arrived after the storm. The light was unusually clear. Golden rays pierced the massive windows of the estate and reflected off the marble, but not even that brightness could dispel the oppressive atmosphere reigning in the house. Vance had not slept all night. He was still sitting on the Italian leather sofa. The ashtray beside him was completely full. His face, normally arrogant and self-assured, showed deep signs of exhaustion. The image of the black Bentley kept burning in his chest, mixed with an anxiety he could not understand. The house was too quiet. There were no sounds of utensils in the kitchen. There was no smell of breakfast. There was no aroma of the oatmeal Clara always prepared when he stayed up late. Her absence had become terrifyingly obvious. Every corner of that luxurious estate felt empty, cold, dead. He tried to convince himself that she was simply angry. Of course she would come back. Maybe she would cry. Maybe they would argue. And then he would impose his authority as always. Everything would return to normal, to that world where he controlled everything. He was used to the story ending that way. At that moment, the sound of a familiar engine approaching the driveway was heard. Vance stood up immediately and walked to the window. An elegant black Bentley had just stopped in front of the estate. The door opened. Julian stepped out first with elegance, then opened the passenger door for Clara. She was no longer wearing the soaked dress from the night before. She now wore a simple but elegant white dress. Her figure seemed even more delicate, more ethereal. Her dry, long hair fell softly over her shoulders. The fire inside Vance's chest exploded immediately. That scene was an unforgivable provocation. Not only had she gotten into another man's car, she allowed him to bring her home, and she was wearing clothes he had surely provided. Julian did not come inside. He exchanged a few words with her, looked at her kindly, and then returned to his car. The Bentley disappeared down the driveway. Clara walked calmly toward the house. The lock emitted a sharp click as she entered. She looked up. In front of her stood Vance, motionless in the middle of the living room, like a mountain loaded with fury. His face still showed the exhaustion of the previous night, but his eyes were strangely quiet. The passionate love, the pain, the resentment, all those emotions that Vance knew had also disappeared from her. Only indifference remained. An icy indifference, like a frozen lake in the dead of winter. And that calm unsettled him. Vance liked to see her cry. He liked to see her angry, because it proved she still cared. But this silence was different. It was as if he had ceased to exist in her world. He was about to explode. The questions, the reproaches, the insults, everything was ready to spill from his mouth. So if you knew how to get home, where were you all night? Who is that man? Do you have no shame? His voice was harsh, every word cutting like a blade. But to his surprise, Clara did not answer. She did not justify herself. She did not argue. She did not even look at him. She simply walked to the mahogany coffee table, opened her purse, pulled out a folded document, and placed it carefully on the table. Vance narrowed his eyes. What is that? Clara slowly unfolded the document. The black letters stood out immediately, and for an instant, Vance's brain stopped working. Petition for divorce. On the signature line, the name Clara Sterling was clearly written in an elegant, delicate signature, yet heavy with determination. Clara looked up, and finally, their eyes met. Vance, we are getting a divorce. Her voice completely lacked emotion. There was no resentment, no sadness, no desperation. It was not a request or a threat. It was simply a declaration. The communication of a decision already made. Vance's world seemed to crumble. He was paralyzed. All the anger and jealousy he had built up got stuck in his throat. He could not believe it. The woman who always obeyed, the woman who had made him the center of her universe, The person he believed incapable of abandoning him was precisely the one handing him divorce papers. He had always thought he held all the power in that marriage, that divorcing or not was exclusively his decision. But today, everything had changed. Clara's ruthless serenity stripped him of all his weapons. Vance looked at her indifferent face. Then he looked down at the documents. For the first time in his life, he felt fear, genuine fear. The feeling of losing something irreplaceable, and even worse, the feeling of having no control whatsoever. Silence took over the living room. A long moment passed before he found his voice. A dry laugh escaped his lips. Divorce? Clara, are you joking? He tried to regain his dominant position. He tried to belittle her, to drag her back into the role of a weak, submissive wife. Just over an argument last night? You are making this kind of scene? Who do you think you are to say the word divorce in front of me? Without waiting for an answer, he snatched the papers. His fury exploded. He violently tore the sheets apart. The white pieces flew through the air. They fell onto the marble like dead butterflies. I do not agree, he roared. His eyes were bloodshot. You are Vance Sterling's wife. You are Mrs. Sterling. Do not even think you can escape me. I will not allow it. He thought that reaction would scare her. He thought she would cry, that she would beg. But Clara remained motionless, watching the torn fragments of paper at her feet, without fear, without anger, without any reaction at all. That calm was the cruelest whip to his wounded pride. His authority, his wrath, his power. Nothing worked against her. Tearing them is useless, she said in a monotone voice. I prepared several copies. This was just to inform you. I will file the petition directly with the court. She paused and looked at the rage-twisted face before her. Today I came back solely to collect my things. Having said that, she turned around and began walking up the stairs, ignoring him entirely. Vance stood frozen among the remains of the document. For the first time, he felt absolute powerlessness. Everything was slipping through his fingers, and he did not know how to stop it. He heard her footsteps on the upper floor, then the sound of drawers, clothes rustling. Every noise was like a needle piercing his heart. She was really leaving. She was not faking it. It was not a threat. It was real. Shortly after, Clara returned down the stairs. She was not carrying multiple suitcases like he had imagined, just a small carry-on bag. Vance observed her instinctively. She was still wearing the white dress. And then he realized something. She had not taken a single thing he had bought her. The designer dresses, the exclusive handbags, the expensive jewelry. It was all still there. The only thing she carried, aside from a few simple clothes, was an old wooden box. A box Vance recognized instantly. The blow to his heart was brutal. He knew exactly what was inside. It was the antique fiber art and weaving kit her mother had left her. It was Alara's entire world, her whole soul. The very part of her he had forced her to bury. That she was taking that box was far more painful than seeing her abandon all the luxury items. It was a statement, a definitive declaration. She was not just leaving Vance. She was recovering herself. She was looking for Alara again, the woman he had destroyed. When Clara reached the front door, Vance's phone began to ring. The name Sienna Brooks appeared on the screen. Out of reflex, he answered. Vance, how are you? Sienna's sweet, whining voice echoed in the silent living room. It sounded strangely repulsive. Has your wife come back? Is she over her tantrum? I was so worried about you last night. Clara's hand rested on the doorknob. Upon hearing that voice, she paused for just a fraction of a second. And that pause was like the final blade, the one that definitively cut the last thread still binding her to him. She did not turn around. She did not look back. She opened the door, took her suitcase, and stepped out. The bright morning light enveloped her figure, as if welcoming a new life, a rebirth. The heavy wooden door closed slowly. Click. A clean sound. Definitive, the sound of an ending. Vance remained motionless in that cold house, with the remnants of the divorce papers scattered at his feet, and Sienna's voice still echoing from the phone. Hello, Vance, are you listening to me? But he could no longer hear anything. An immense void had opened up inside his chest, an icy emptiness, and it hurt so much he could barely breathe. He had lost something he always believed was his, something he took for granted, and now he had absolutely no idea how to get it back. After leaving the cold Sterling estate, Clara did not look back once. She returned to the Hayes Fine Art Gallery, the only place that had offered her refuge during the darkest days of her life. Julian Hayes had organized everything perfectly. He did not ask how the conversation with Vance had ended. He did not pry into her past. He simply offered her respect, space, and tranquility. In the east wing of the gallery, there is an empty room with excellent lighting, he told her the next morning. I asked them to set it up. If you do not mind, you can use it as a studio. Clara followed him there. It was a space separated from the main exhibition area. Quiet, private. Sunlight poured through the large windows. The golden rays spread across the hardwood floor. In the center sat a massive oak work table and a large professional weaving loom. Everything was prepared, as if it had been waiting for the return of its true owner. Clara's heart trembled. It had been 3 years since she had a place of her own like that. At the Sterling estate, she possessed a massive walk-in closet, an elegant vanity, every imaginable luxury, but she never had a space where she could be herself. Thank you, Julian. This time, her gratitude was completely sincere. You do not have to thank me, he replied with a smile. I am just someone who appreciates art and tries to prevent a brilliant artist from disappearing. That same day, Clara opened the old wooden box she had brought with her. When she lifted the lid, the familiar scent of wood and specialty silk threads hit her immediately. Her nose burned. Inside were spools of silk in multiple colors perfectly organized. The silver needles still gleamed. The small frames held unfinished fabrics, and at the bottom lay sketchbooks yellowed by the passage of time. Clara ran her fingertips over every tool. That was her world, that was her life. For 3 years she had buried herself alive. Her hand stopped over a piece of white silk that had been left half-finished. It showed 2 swans woven over a lake. It was a piece she had started to celebrate her first anniversary with Vance, but a comment of his had destroyed it. This wastes too much of your time. After hearing that, she packed the piece away and never touched it again. Looking at those swans, she thought of her broken marriage. A bitter irony enveloped her. With determination, she removed the fabric from the frame and hid it at the bottom of the box. The past was dead. Alara woke up, and she would no longer create sentimental and fragile works. She took out a piece of pure black silk and stretched it over the largest frame. She did not need sketches. The composition, the colors, every stitch, everything was perfectly defined in her mind. She was going to weave a phoenix, not a bridal phoenix, not a symbol of romantic love, but a phoenix engulfed in fire, rising from the ashes, brighter, prouder, more powerful than ever. The only thing she took was that old wooden box that held everything he had always considered useless. It was then that Vance understood something that left him completely stunned. Clara had not left for money. She had not left for luxuries. She had not left for material goods. She had left to reclaim her soul, the soul he himself had tried to extinguish with his own hands. A sense of loss unlike anything he had ever experienced struck him head-on. Painful, clear, impossible to ignore. During the following days, Vance lived trapped in a contradiction that bordered on madness. During the day, he buried himself in work. He was colder and more ruthless than ever. The entire Sterling Corporation lived in terror. No one dared to make the slightest mistake. But when night came and he returned to the empty estate, the loneliness and the sense of loss haunted him relentlessly. The image of Clara walking away with her suitcase, the image of the black Bentley, it all repeated over and over in his head like a torture film. Jealousy began to coil slowly around his arrogant heart like a venomous snake. He could not accept that the woman who had always obeyed him had walked away with such determination, much less that almost immediately another man had appeared by her side. In Vance's stubborn mind, Clara was his. Even if he did not value her, even if he did not appreciate her, even if he did not know how to love her, no one else had the right to get close to her. The need to find out who that man was became an obsession. He needed to find out how long they had been seeing each other. He needed an excuse, a justification, something to prove that he was not the one to blame, something that would allow him to convince himself that she had betrayed him first. Sitting in his luxurious CEO office, he called his trusted assistant. Harrison, I need you to look into something. His voice was as cold as ice. The assistant bowed his head immediately. Yes, Mr. Sterling. I want you to find out who owns a black Bentley. License plate. Vance recited the number he had memorized the night of the storm. I want to know everything about this man. His identity, his background, his contacts, his social circle, and above all, he paused. His eyes darkened. Find out who he has been associating with recently, especially if he has been associating with Clara. Harrison was slightly surprised to hear that name, but he was too smart to ask questions. Yes, Mr. Sterling, I will take care of it right away. With the resources of the Sterling Corporation, investigating a person was a simple task. Less than 2 days later, a thick file appeared, perfectly placed on Vance's desk. He opened it. The first page showed a photograph along with the man's details. Julian Hayes, 30 years old. The man in the photograph was extremely attractive, but he did not possess the aggressive, dominant presence of Vance. Julian's appearance was refined, serene. His deep eyes seemed to hold a universe of intelligence. He was a renowned art dealer, an art collector, and the owner of the most prestigious private gallery in New York, the Hayes Fine Art Gallery. His background was also impressive. He came from an old, wealthy Boston family with a long tradition tied to the fine arts. The more Vance read, the more unpleasant his expression became. At first, he had assumed the man was just some newly rich upstart using his money to impress a naive woman. But no, Julian Hayes not only had money, he had prestige, he had class, and he commanded enormous respect within the social elite. The excellence of his rival only fueled his jealousy further, as well as his sense of failure. He turned to the next page and felt an invisible hand squeeze his heart. The report was damning. According to the investigation, Clara Sterling had moved into the Hayes Fine Art Gallery after leaving the Sterling estate and currently resided there. Attached were several photographs taken from a distance. In one of them, Clara was walking through the gallery's interior courtyard. Julian was walking beside her. There was no intimate contact, but the atmosphere between them was peaceful, natural, harmonious. In another image, Clara was sitting in front of a weaving loom. The sunlight illuminated her focused face, a serene beauty that Vance had never seen in her. Bang! Vance slammed his fist onto the desk. The coffee beside him spilled immediately. All the suspicions he had fed seemed confirmed. She was living with him. She had moved in with that man. Rage and humiliation exploded inside him, erasing any trace of rationality. He did not consider that he himself had kicked her out of the house. He did not consider that she had nowhere to go. He did not even consider that the relationship between them might be entirely innocent. In his mind, only one word existed: betrayal. So that was it, he muttered through gritted teeth. She already had an exit prepared. Her insistence on the divorce was not out of pain. It was because she had found someone better to back her up. He clenched his jaw tightly. Veins began to stand out on his forehead. The woman he always thought docile and obedient turned out to be so calculating. Very well, Clara. Very well. His anger slowly transformed into a sickly need for possession. He had to see her. He had to confront her. He had to unmask her and show her the consequences of daring to challenge Vance Sterling. Without a second thought, he grabbed his car keys, snatched his coat, and stormed out of the office. The cold aura he gave off made all the employees lower their heads and step out of his way. He was going to the Hayes Gallery. He was going to reclaim what he considered his. The dark blue Porsche Cayenne braked sharply in front of the main entrance of the Hayes Fine Art Gallery. The screech of the tires shattered the tranquility of the place. Vance stepped out of the vehicle, slammed the door shut, completely ignored the security guard, and marched inside like a king ready to reclaim his territory. The Hayes Gallery was completely different from the world of steel and concrete where Vance felt comfortable. There was no ostentation, no exaggerated luxury, just discreet elegance. The scent of cedarwood hung in the air. The sound of a fountain accompanied the silence. The leaves of the oak trees swayed gently in the wind. All of it was unbearable to Vance. The serenity of the place seemed to mock his aggression. "Where is Clara?" He grabbed the arm of an employee passing by. "I want to see her right now." The man was startled. "Sir, who exactly are you looking for?" "I am looking for my wife. Tell Clara to come out." At that moment, a calm voice echoed. "Mr. Sterling, what brings you to my gallery?" Vance spun around abruptly. Julian Hayes stood a few feet away. He wore casual linen clothes with rolled-up sleeves, completely relaxed. His calm eyes met Vance's, without fear, without hesitation. The difference between the two men was obvious. One looked like a raging wildfire, the other a tranquil autumn lake. Seeing him sent Vance's rage skyrocketing. He stepped forward until he was face to face with him. "So, you are Mr. Hayes." His eyes were sharp as blades. "I am not interested in explaining why I am here. I only want to ask you one question. Hiding another man's wife in this place. Does that seem proper for a gentleman?" The provocation was obvious, but Julian did not get angry. He simply offered a small smile, a quiet smile, but loaded with meaning. Mr. Sterling, you are looking for Clara. But here, only the fiber artist Alara exists. That sentence landed on Vance like a slap. It was not just an answer, it was a denial. He was denying his rights as a husband, denying the name Clara Sterling that he had forced upon her. He was telling him that the woman he was looking for no longer existed, that someone new had been born there, someone who no longer belonged to him. You are lying, Vance roared, completely losing control. Where is she? You two have been seeing each other behind my back. Today I am going to end this. Just as the tension reached its peak, a clear and indifferent voice sounded from the studio. What is all this noise about? Both men turned around. Clara, or rather, Alara, stood by the doorway. She was wearing a loose white button-down, wide gray linen pants, and an indigo blue apron tied at her waist. In her hand, she held a weaving needle. Her hair was pulled back into an elegant bun, exposing her neck and forehead. The woman standing there was no longer the sophisticated Mrs. Sterling covered in designer clothes. She was simple, natural, free, and exuded an independence Vance had never seen. She looked at him. Her eyes were clear as water, but they were entirely void of emotion. There was no surprise, no fear, no love, not even resentment, only distance, the same distance shown to a stranger. That look pierced straight through Vance's heart and hurt more than any insult. You, he stammered. All the aggressive words he had prepared got caught in his throat. You dare look at me like that? Come with me right now. He tried to reclaim what little authority he had left. Alara frowned slightly, as if she had just heard an absurd joke. Mr. Sterling, she said calmly, you have the wrong place. This is the Hayes Gallery, not your house. She paused. She watched Vance's face, growing paler with rage by the second, and added the cruelest sentence of all. Besides, I no longer have any home to return to with you, Mr. Sterling. Those words shattered his pride. Vance lunged toward her, trying to grab her arm. He could not accept that reality. He needed to force her to come back. He needed to recover the obedient Clara of the past. But before he could reach her, a figure stepped between them. Julian firmly blocked his path, without needing to use force. Mr. Sterling, have a little dignity. Julian's voice remained calm, but his eyes shot an icy warning. Vance stared at the man protecting her. Then he looked at Alara, and suddenly he felt ridiculous. He had arrived ready to demonstrate his authority, to claim what he considered his, and ended up looking like an intruder. Here, he was not the husband, he was not the powerful man, he was not the owner of anything. In this new world of Alara's, he was simply a stranger. Shame, jealousy, rage, and the fear of losing her forever mixed inside his chest. He could not do anything. He could not intimidate Julian Hayes with money or power, and much less hold on to a woman with emotions who no longer felt anything for him. For the first time in his entire life, Vance Sterling knew absolute defeat. He slowly lowered his hands and took a step back. His eyes remained fixed on Alara. Finally, he said nothing more. He turned around and left the gallery. His steps faltered slightly, like a wounded beast trying to preserve the last shreds of its pride. Tranquility returned to the gallery, as if the place were silently mocking the storm that had just passed through it. That night, the Jacob Javits Center in Manhattan sparkled under thousands of lights. The city's elite had gathered there. The Starlight Benefit Art Auction was one of the most prestigious events of the year, a place where exceptional pieces were exhibited, and where the most powerful displayed their wealth, their influence, and their philanthropy. Vance arrived late, and in reality, he had no interest in art. His presence there was solely a social obligation as CEO of the Sterling Corporation. But as he absently flipped through the auction catalog, his eyes stopped dead on a name. Lot number 13. Double-sided woven fiber art. Rebirth. Artist, Alara. Alara. That name was like a thorn digging into his chest. After the humiliating defeat he had suffered at the Hayes Gallery, he had locked himself away in his anger and frustration. He had forbidden himself from thinking about her. But that name dragged her right back into his thoughts. He found a secluded corner of the ballroom. His eyes scanned the crowd, and then he saw her. Vance's heart skipped a beat. That was not Clara, the discreet wife who spent her days at home. That was Alara. She was wearing an elegant emerald green dress with a modern cut. The fabric hugged her soft curves perfectly. Her long hair was pinned up, revealing her pale neck and delicate pearl earrings. Her makeup was simple, a light foundation, a soft touch of color on her lips, and yet, she radiated an ethereal beauty that drew every eye. Beside her was Julian Hayes. He wore an impeccable gray suit, refined, serene. There were no intimate gestures between them, but together they formed such a harmonious image that it was impossible to ignore. Julian leaned in slightly to say something to her, and she smiled. It was not the resigned smile Vance knew. It was not the smile of someone enduring. It was an authentic, peaceful, happy smile. That image was like a torch, igniting the fire inside his chest. The jealousy and possessiveness he had tried to suppress returned stronger than ever. That woman was his. That smile should have been for him. At that moment, the auctioneer's voice rang out from the stage. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we present to you an extraordinary work of contemporary fiber art, a piece that has caused a sensation among collectors and critics over the past few weeks. We present to you Rebirth. The spotlights focused on the piece. The phoenix seemed to come to life, imposing, majestic. Under the lights, the golden and red threads truly seemed to burn. They conveyed an indomitable strength, a mixture of suffering and pride. The entire ballroom marveled. Gasps of admiration could be heard everywhere. Julian took the stage to introduce the piece. He did not use grand speeches. He simply spoke about the intricate technique of double-sided weaving and the passion the artist had poured into that creation. The artist behind Rebirth, Alara, is also joining us tonight, he said, casting a warm look toward her. Her wish is that this piece brings a little warmth to the world. All funds raised will be donated to the Appalachian Youth Education Foundation to build boarding schools for children in mountainous regions. All eyes turned to Alara. She simply smiled and nodded gracefully, without shyness, without nervousness. Vance watched from the shadows, his fists clenched. He looked at the artwork, then at the woman shining under the lights. Was that really his wife? The woman he had considered for years to be someone who only knew how to cook, clean, and depend on him. How was it possible that she had created a piece capable of moving so many people? How could she appear so confident, so independent, so free? For the first time, he understood something painful. For 3 years, he had never truly known her. He only knew Mrs. Sterling, the version he himself had built. He never cared to discover who the woman hidden behind that facade was. And now he understood he had thrown a treasure overboard with his own hands. The starting bid for Rebirth will be $500,000, the auctioneer announced. The bidding started immediately. $600,000, $800,000, $1 million. The paddles went up relentlessly. Collectors, entrepreneurs, art lovers. Everyone wanted that piece. They were not just buying a woven tapestry. They were buying a story, a symbol, an exceptional talent. Alara watched everything calmly. Her gaze swept across the room, and suddenly, it stopped. Vance. Their eyes met across the crowd. In his eyes, there was jealousy, rage, surprise, and a regret that was barely beginning to surface. In her eyes, there was only calm. No love, no hate, no resentment. Only indifference, as if she were looking at a complete stranger. And that indifference completely infuriated him. An irrational idea crossed his mind. He would use the only method he knew, money. He would buy the artwork. He would buy her life's work. He would buy her soul, and he would prove to her that she could never escape him. The cold and dominant voice of Vance rang out over all other bids. The entire ballroom fell silent. Every head turned toward him. Vance stood up slowly, holding the bidding paddle. His face was expressionless, but his eyes burned with a sickly possessiveness. The number sparked a wave of whispers. It is Vance Sterling. $5 million for a tapestry? He has gone crazy. He has never been interested in art. Something else is going on here. Vance heard the comments, but he did not care. He was only watching one person, Alara. He wanted to see her surprised, destabilized. He wanted her to understand he could still control her. On the stage, Julian frowned slightly. He understood perfectly what was happening. This was not artistic admiration. It was a provocation, an act of possession. He raised his own paddle. $5.5 million. Vance smirked with contempt. $7 million. The room shuddered again. That figure vastly exceeded the real market value of a contemporary textile piece. As extraordinary as it was, everyone understood this had ceased to be an auction. It was now a war between two men. Julian looked at Alara. She shook her head softly. She did not want him involved in that absurd battle. Julian got the message, smiled calmly at her, and lowered his paddle. Then, Vance delivered his final blow. $10 million. The figure dropped like a bomb. It was an absurd amount, a declaration of victory. The auctioneer took several seconds to react. Then he quickly struck the gavel. 10 million going once, 10 million going twice. Sold. The audience erupted in applause, though most were clapping more out of disbelief than enthusiasm. Vance stood tall among the crowd, feeling a brief sense of triumph. He had won. He had defeated Julian. He had bought the artwork, and he believed he had regained some control. When the event ended, he walked straight toward the VIP area. Alara and Julian were there, conversing with several collectors. His arrival made the atmosphere instantly tense. The other guests found excuses to step away. Soon, only the three of them remained. Vance stopped in front of her. He did not even look at Julian. All his attention was on Alara. He held up the purchase contract. His voice sounded proud. Well, the piece you put your heart into, this supposed rebirth, ended up in my hands after all. He spoke as if he were granting her a favor. Clara, you should understand something. It does not matter who you think you are or how high you fly. You will never escape me. He waited. He waited to see anger, frustration, or at least a small reaction. But he was wrong again. Alara looked up. Her eyes were still as calm as an autumn lake. She showed no emotion, only a polite, distant smile. Thank you, Mr. Sterling, for your support. Her voice was serene, professional, as if speaking to just another sponsor. The $10 million will be transferred in full to the Appalachian Youth Education Foundation, just as requested. Thanks to your generosity, boarding schools can be built for children in the mountains. She paused briefly, and then uttered the sentence that utterly destroyed him. On behalf of those children, I thank you deeply for your generosity, Mr. Sterling. It was like a slap in the face. Everything shattered into pieces. His pride, his victory, his arrogance. It all vanished in an instant. What had she done? She transformed his attempt at possession into an act of charity. She turned his provocation into a charitable contribution. He spent $10 million trying to humiliate her, and ended up becoming the main benefactor of her cause. That humiliation hurt far more than any rejection. He had used money to prove his power. She used that exact same money to elevate her purpose, reducing him to a man who had just spent a fortune to bankroll a good deed. The smile vanished from Vance's face. His expression shifted from pride to bewilderment, and from bewilderment to shame. He stood frozen with the contract in his hand, like a clown on a luxury stage. Alara did not spare him another second. She turned to Julian. It is getting late. Let us go home. Of course, Julian replied. Before leaving, he looked at Vance. Not with arrogance, but with a slight pity. The two walked away together, leaving him alone, motionless. The sense of victory vanished completely. Only emptiness remained, and a belated regret that was beginning to devour his soul. He could buy a piece of art, but he could never buy back her heart, her respect, or even a glance. The price of regret turned out to be much higher than he had ever imagined. The scandal at the Starlight Gala quickly became the favorite topic of conversation among the New York elite. The name Alara and her piece Rebirth began to be mentioned with admiration and respect. Meanwhile, Vance's gesture of spending millions of dollars was interpreted in 1,000 different ways. Sienna Brooks, of course, did not take long to find out. When she read the news online, her first reaction was absolute joy. In her eyes, Vance had spent that fortune to humiliate Clara, to show her that no matter who she tried to be, she was still just a toy in his hands. This further strengthened her sense of victory. She believed her position beside Vance was more solid than ever. Encouraged by that thought, she personally prepared a luxurious fruit basket and headed to the headquarters of the Sterling Corporation. She wanted to celebrate with him. She walked straight into the CEO's office without knocking. Vance. Her voice sounded sweet and cheerful. I saw the news. You were incredible. Those 10 million really put Clara in her place. She must have turned white when she saw what you did. Vance was sitting behind the desk. His face was grim. He had just personally signed the $10 million check destined for the foundation, and he felt as if he had slapped himself in the face. Hearing Sienna's voice increased his irritation. What are you doing here? He asked coldly. Sienna was surprised for a moment, but quickly recovered her usual attitude. I came to see you. Look, I even brought your favorite wine. We should celebrate. She walked around the desk, trying to sit on his lap like she always did, but Vance pulled back slightly. I am busy. That slight rejection froze Sienna's smile. Something was not right. She felt it immediately, but she insisted. Busy with what? The Clara situation is already resolved. What else could you be worried about? She wrapped her arms around his neck from behind. Her tone became more demanding. Vance, why don't we make our relationship public? She pointed out. Everyone knows what happened at the auction. This is the perfect time. I do not want to keep hiding like this. Sienna had been waiting years for that day. The day she could officially take her place beside Vance Sterling. The day she would become the new Mrs. Sterling. But suddenly, Vance found her voice insufferably annoying. I already told you it is not the right time. And why not? Sienna lost her patience. What are you waiting for? Do you plan to leave the position of Mrs. Sterling empty forever? Or is it that you still miss your ex-wife after she made a fool of you in front of the whole world? That last sentence hit directly at the wound Vance was trying to hide. Shut up! He interrupted sharply, pushing her arms away forcefully. Who gave you the right to talk about her like that? Sienna stumbled back a few steps. She could not believe what she had just heard. He was defending her. Am I wrong? Tears began to pool in her eyes. She is living with another man. Is that not a betrayal? You spent $10 million. Was it not to humiliate her, to warn her she could not challenge you? Then why do you have that expression now? What are you really thinking, Vance? What I think is none of your business. Vance shot up. All the exhaustion and frustration he had been accumulating for days finally exploded. He looked at Sienna's tearful face, a face that once seemed innocent and worthy of pity, but now only seemed fake, annoying, noisy. For the first time, an unavoidable comparison appeared in his mind. Clara? Sienna, do you know something? His voice was low, but every word fell like a hammer. In 3 years of marriage, Clara never demanded anything from me. Sienna stood frozen. She never asked for public displays of affection. She never demanded expensive gifts. She never interrogated me when I came home late. As he spoke, the image of Clara became increasingly clear in his mind, more alive, more painful. And now, look at you. Those words pierced Sienna. It was a comparison, and she was losing. The humiliation was unbearable. What do you mean by that? Her voice trembled with rage. Are you saying I am annoying? Have you forgotten you were the one who said you hated Clara's silence? Why now? Enough. Vance cut her off. He felt like his head was going to explode. He did not want to hear another word. Go home. I want to be alone. The kind, compliant mask he had worn with Sienna finally broke. Beneath it appeared the real Vance. Cold, selfish, impatient. The same man Clara had endured for 3 long years. Sienna stared at the man before her and felt like she was looking at a stranger. Panic began to take hold of her. The perfect man she thought she controlled was not as manipulable as she had imagined. The first crack in that relationship built on lies had just appeared, and it was deep, irreparable. After that argument, Vance was in no mood to work. He left the office, but he also did not want to return to the empty estate. He drove aimlessly through the crowded streets of New York. However, inside him there was only a desert, a sense of loss, of emptiness, of disorientation, something a man used to controlling everything had never experienced. Finally, he ended up in front of the estate, the same estate as always, imposing, luxurious, spectacular, and completely devoid of warmth. The silence was terrifying. He walked in, walked through the living room, then the bedroom, then the kitchen, and in every corner, Clara appeared. Clara, reading on the sofa. Clara, cooking. Clara smiling when he came home. Scenes that previously seemed normal to him, even boring, and that now had become impossible luxuries to reclaim. Without realizing it, he ended up in front of a small room at the end of the hallway on the 2nd floor. It was Clara's private study, a place where she organized the household expenses or simply retreated to read. Vance had rarely gone in there. The room was simple, a wooden desk, a bookshelf, and a small armchair by the window. Everything was still tidy, but a fine layer of dust was beginning to cover it. Vance slumped into the armchair, exhausted. He looked out the window. He needed a distraction. Anything would do. A book, a bottle of liquor, whatever. He absent-mindedly opened one of the drawers of the old desk and found a wooden box. It was not the cedarwood box Clara had taken. It was simpler, older. It looked like it had been sitting there for years. Curiosity urged him to open it. It had no lock. He lifted the lid, and the first thing he saw were several sketchbooks yellowed by time. He began flipping through them. Page after page revealed designs for textile art. Vibrant peonies, koi leaping over waterfalls, landscapes full of life. The strokes were elegant, the compositions extraordinary. He even found the first sketches of swans on the Lake of Time, and also the initial designs for Rebirth. Vance froze. That was the talent he had despised, calling it a waste of time. So before becoming Mrs. Sterling, Clara had been an artist, brilliant, luminous, extraordinary. He set the sketchbooks aside, and then he saw a small brown notebook hidden at the bottom of the box. A diary. His pride told him he should not read it, but a more powerful need took over. He needed to understand. He needed to discover how they had arrived at this point. With trembling hands, he opened the first page. Clara's handwriting was beautiful, soft, elegant. She did not write every day. She only recorded important thoughts, special moments. The first entry was dated the day of their wedding. Today is my wedding. Vance told me I just need to be Mrs. Sterling, that is enough. I packed away my weaving tools. Maybe it is the right thing to do. For him, I can give up everything. Vance's heart contracted painfully. He turned to the next entry. First anniversary. Today is our anniversary. Vance forgot. He went to a meeting and came home late. It is fine. He is working hard for our family. I ate the little cake alone. It was still delicious. Vance felt a knot in his chest. He turned another page. The entry was from a few weeks before that storm. I feel like every day he is further away from me. The perfume on his shirt no longer belongs to just one woman. My heart hurts so much, but what can I do? I cannot lose him. Vance's breathing began to grow heavy. Then he reached the last page. The ink still looked fresh. The date hit him like a lightning bolt. Today we celebrate 3 years of marriage. I booked a table at his favorite restaurant. I hope he comes home early. I just want to have dinner with him. Vance, I love you. 3 years of marriage. Exactly that day. The same day he abandoned her on the highway. The same day he called her insufferable. The same day he ran to the side of another woman. It was their anniversary. The day she had looked forward to. The day she had carefully prepared, and her only wish had been to share a dinner with him. Vance's mind exploded. Suddenly he remembered something. That night inside the car, right before Sienna called, Clara had tried to tell him something. Vance, tonight is, but he had cut her off. Impatient, cold. If you have something to say, spit it out. She had tried to remind him of their anniversary, but he never gave her the chance. All the scattered pieces clicked together at once, revealing an unbearable truth. His selfishness, his indifference, his cruelty. The regret stopped being a vague feeling. It transformed into a knife that pierced his heart, twisting slowly, making it impossible for him to breathe. What had he done? He had trampled on her love, he had destroyed her trust, he had shattered her heart on the exact day she cherished the most. Vance hid his face in his hands, clutching the diary to his chest. For the first time in his entire life, the shoulders of the man who believed himself invincible began to shake. He had not just lost her. He had murdered her love with his own indifference. In a luxury penthouse overlooking the East River, shards of expensive glass covered the floor. Sienna Brooks was breathing heavily. Her hair was disheveled. Her beautiful face, twisted with rage, had just destroyed everything within her reach. Failure. For the first time in her life, she was tasting such a bitter failure. Vance Sterling, the man to whom she had dedicated years of manipulation, the man she thought she had completely under control, had kicked her out without a second thought. Not only had he been cold, but he had also compared her to Clara, and she had lost. Clara! Clara! Why is it always her? She screamed in a shrill voice. She picked up the tablet resting on the table. Every news outlet was talking about the same thing. Ilara, the artist. Ilara, the rediscovered jewel of New York textile art. Rebirth. The story of an artist who had returned to shine. And Julian Hayes's name appeared over and over as the man who had propelled her comeback. Every compliment was a needle digging into Sienna's pride. Clara had not collapsed. She had not disappeared. Quite the opposite. She was shining brighter than ever. She had a career, the admiration of the public, and she also had the backing of a man as influential as Julian Hayes. Meanwhile, she was being rejected by the very man she had been trying to conquer for years. The comparison was driving her crazy. She realized that crying, playing the victim, no longer worked with Vance. His heart was beginning to lean back toward Clara, and if she did not do something soon, everything she had built would crumble. No, she could not lose, and if she could not be happy, Clara would not live in peace either. A venomous thought appeared in her mind. She could not attack Vance's feelings, but she could destroy what Clara valued most: her career. In the art world, there is one accusation capable of destroying any reputation: plagiarism. A single word, and an artist's career can be buried forever. Sienna's eyes gleamed with cruelty. She picked up her phone immediately and called her publicist, Blair. A woman famous for getting anything done, regardless of the methods. Blair. Sienna's voice was calm, but frighteningly cold. I need your help. What is going on? Blair asked. Find me an older fiber artist, retired and with financial problems. Preferably someone desperate for money. Also, her style needs to vaguely resemble Alara's. On the other end of the line, there was a brief silence. Blair was too smart not to understand her intentions. What are you planning? It is not that simple. Alara is backed by Julian Hayes now. I do not care, Sienna replied, gritting her teeth. I just need to plant a doubt. A small suspicion. Public opinion will do the rest. She paused and added, Julian Hayes might be powerful, but he cannot silence the entire world. Money is not an issue. Ask for whatever you want. Hearing that determination, Blair stopped trying to convince her otherwise. All right, I will handle it. Only a few days later, she found the perfect person. Evelyn Higgins, a retired textile artist living in a small town in Pennsylvania. She had had some recognition in her youth but retired due to health problems. Currently, she was going through a very difficult financial situation. She desperately needed money to cover her husband's medical treatments, and indeed, her style bore certain classic similarities to Alara's artistic school. Sienna acted immediately. She sent someone with a large sum of money and a carefully prepared script. The next move in her plan had just begun. At first, the old woman hesitated, but when she saw the massive sum of money that could save her husband's life, her conscience began to waver. Finally, she agreed to cooperate. She handed over several of her old sketches. With the testimony secured, Sienna and Blair moved to the next step. Fabricating evidence, they hired specialists in photographic manipulation. They carefully altered details of Evelyn's old sketches to match the composition and concept of Rebirth and several other pieces by Alara. They also invented a touching backstory. According to that version, Evelyn Higgins had been Alara's mentor. She had taught her everything she knew. She had shared a lifetime of work with her, only to end up betrayed and robbed by her own student. When everything was ready, Blair contacted a well-known blogger who specialized in art world scandals, a man willing to write anything for the right price. And one seemingly normal morning, the bomb exploded. A lengthy article appeared on a blog with hundreds of thousands of followers. The headline was as sensationalist as it was devastating. Reborn Jeets, or Talent Thief, the hidden truth behind Alara's masterpiece. The article was written with enormous sympathy toward the supposed victim. It narrated the tragic story of Evelyn Higgins. It showed side-by-step photographic comparisons between Evelyn's original sketches and Alara's finished works. The manipulated images looked alarmingly similar. Moreover, it included a tearful statement attributed to Evelyn. I do not care about fame. I just want an apology. I just want my life's work to be acknowledged. The post exploded on the internet. The reaction was immediate. Public opinion, always fascinated by scandals and the downfall of admired figures, leaped on the news. Thousands of comments began to appear. I cannot believe someone who looks so elegant has such a horrible personality. Turns out she is just a thief. Now I understand why she disappeared for 3 years. She was probably looking for new ideas to steal. Poor Mrs. Higgins. Justice for Evelyn Higgins. The New York art world was shaken. Alara had just stepped back into the light. She was barely beginning to rebuild her life. And in a matter of hours, she was dragged into the abyss of a scandal capable of destroying an entire career. At that moment, she was working in her studio, completely unaware of the storm of hatred and defamation approaching. A storm ready to devour her. The media offensive arrived suddenly, violently, exactly like the storm that had battered the interstate that night. When Julian walked into the studio with a grave expression and handed her a tablet to read the article, Alara's world crumbled for a second time. She froze, staring at the screen. The unfamiliar face of Evelyn Higgins, the sketches that looked familiar and strange at the same time, the accusations, the lies. Every word felt like a stab wound. She did not know that woman. She had never seen those drawings. But the trap was carefully designed. The manipulated comparisons created an almost perfect illusion. No, it was not me, she murmured. The needle she held between her fingers trembled and dropped onto the hardwood floor. Clink. The metallic sound echoed in the silence. The powerlessness rushed back all at once. The feeling of being judged unfairly, of being condemned without real proof. Her past with Vance had left her vulnerable, scarred. For a moment, she felt that the whole world was turning its back on her once again. Julian watched as the color drained from her face. He felt a pang in his chest, but he did not offer her empty words. He did not try to distract her. He simply placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "Alara, look at me." She looked up. Her eyes were filled with anguish. "I believe you." Just 3 words, but they seemed to be worth more than 10,000. They were like a warm current flowing through a frozen heart. There were no doubts, no interrogations, only absolute trust. "This is a carefully prepared trap," Julian continued serenely. "They planned it very well, but the more elaborate a deception is, the more mistakes it leaves behind." He paused. "Now is not the time to fall apart. We are going to fight this together." Julian's calm began to give her strength. He was right. She was no longer the old Clara. She was no longer the woman who endured everything in silence. She was Alara. She would not allow them to destroy her life's work, nor the legacy her mother had left her. Meanwhile, in the main office of the Sterling Corporation, Vance was also reading the article. His assistant Harrison stood to the side, not even daring to breathe. Vance scrolled through the pages with a stony expression. Anger began to build inside him, but this time it was not directed at her. A doubt crossed his mind. What if it was true? What if she really did it? But then, he remembered the diary. Those pages full of passion, sacrifice, love. No. A woman who considered textile art a part of her soul would never commit something so despicable. And besides, he knew Sienna Brooks all too well. The appearance of that scandal right after he had rejected her was too convenient, too perfect. Harrison. His voice was so cold it was chilling. "Yes, Mr. Sterling. Investigate Evelyn Higgins immediately." "Yes, sir. Check all her bank accounts. Her family's too. I want every single money transfer from the last few months." He paused. His eyes sharpened. "And find out if she has had contact with unknown individuals." Then he added, "Also investigate the blogger who published the story. I want to know who paid him." Harrison nodded. He understood perfectly that his boss was furious. But that fury was not directed at Alara. It was directed at the person pulling the strings from the shadows. Vance began to act in silence. He could not defend her publicly. His pride and, above all, his guilt would not allow it. He felt he had lost the right to intervene in her life. But if he could find the truth and clear her name, it was the only way to atone for the mistakes he had made. While Vance investigated from the shadows, Julian chose a completely different path, facing the situation head-on. That very afternoon, he organized a press conference at the Hayes Gallery. Dozens of journalists flocked to the venue. Reporters, critics, representatives from specialized media. Everyone wanted answers. Alara was also there, sitting next to Julian. Her face reflected exhaustion, but her eyes showed determination. She was not going to hide. She was not going to run. Julian stood up in front of the cameras. His posture was firm, commanding. "Thank you for coming," he began. "I know there is great concern regarding the rumors surrounding the artist Alara and the piece Rebirth." His gaze swept the room. "On behalf of the Hayes Fine Art Gallery and myself, I state that these accusations are completely false." He then presented the evidence collected by his team in a few short hours. He showed old sketches by Alara. They all possessed impossible-to-imitate characteristics, personal details, unique patterns, elements present long before Rebirth ever appeared. He also presented statements from specialized silk suppliers, people who confirmed that Alara personally selected highly specific materials, using techniques mastered only by top-tier experts. Finally, he played a video. Security camera footage from the gallery. A time-lapse montage showed Alara creating Rebirth from the very first stitches. Every stage, every decision, every thread. The entire creative process was documented. The room fell silent. "Authentic art does not need to justify itself," Julian said, looking directly into the cameras. "Alara's talent is indisputable." His voice became even firmer. "The Hayes Fine Art Gallery and I personally will pursue this defamation lawsuit to the fullest extent of the law to protect the honor of our artist." Then he turned to her. His eyes conveyed absolute confidence. "I believe in Alara unconditionally." That statement echoed throughout the room. Alara watched the man sitting beside her. The man who had decided to protect her without hesitation, without asking for explanations, without demanding anything in return. An immense warmth filled her heart. Gratitude, respect, trust. Two men. One fighting for her in the public eye, another investigating silently from the shadows, each in his own way. Both were trying to protect her. And little by little, the web of lies began to close around the true culprit. While the press conference sparked intense public debate, the Sterling Corporation's investigative machine kept running at maximum speed. Vance remained seated in his office. The atmosphere was colder than ever. He did not care about the news. He did not care about the rumors. He only waited. He waited for the truth. And the truth arrived sooner than he imagined. Harrison walked into the office carrying a file even thicker than the previous ones. His expression was extremely serious. "Mr. Sterling, we have the results." Vance said nothing. He simply gestured for him to continue. "Just as you suspected." Harrison opened the folder. The bank account of Evelyn Higgins's son received a deposit of $2 million 3 weeks ago. Vance slowly looked up. Origin? An intermediary account. Harrison turned several pages. "But we managed to track it." He paused. "The money came from Blair, Sienna Brooks's publicist." The silence grew heavy. "And the blogger who published the article received $500,000 from that same network of accounts." Everything was clear. It was a conspiracy bought with money. Vance looked at the documents. His face showed no emotion, but the knuckles of his hands had turned white. Rage burned inside him. He had suspected Sienna, but seeing the proof was different. Much worse. The woman who pretended to be innocent had tried to destroy the life of someone who never wanted to hurt her. "Anything else?" he asked. His voice was dangerously calm. Harrison hesitated. Then he pulled out a small audio player. "Yes, Mr. Sterling." His expression was uncomfortable. "We also found something in the cloud backup of her phone." Vance frowned. "What is it?" "An automatic recording." Harrison swallowed hard. "It was recorded around 10 p.m. on the 15th. The 15th. Vance's heart stopped. That night. The night of the storm. The night that destroyed his marriage. With trembling hands, he took the player and pressed play. The office was filled with painfully familiar sounds. First came Sienna's weak voice. "Vance, I am so sorry to bother you at this hour. I have a terrible fever." Then his own voice played. Cold, impatient. "Stay right where you are. I am on my way." And then came the words he had never truly heard. The words that in that moment he had interpreted as fragility. "There is no need for you to come." Sienna's voice sounded sweet. "Your wife will surely be angry. She has never liked me. Do not argue with her because of me. I would feel terrible." Heard now, those sentences carried a completely different meaning. Every word was a provocation. Every sentence was fuel. Sienna had been manipulating him, pushing him against his own wife, turning him into the weapon that would destroy his marriage. And then came the most devastating part. After he thought he had hung up, perhaps the call took a few seconds longer to disconnect, and the recording captured something he was never meant to hear. A small laugh. Triumphant, cruel, followed by a murmur full of contempt. "Clara Sterling." A pause. "Let us see if you manage to keep him this time." Vance closed his eyes. "Turn it off," he growled. Harrison obeyed immediately. The silence returned, but now it was much more terrifying. Vance remained motionless. His face was completely empty. The truth was worse than he had imagined. It had all been a performance, a carefully prepared play. And he had been the most stupid spectator of all. Not only had they played with his feelings, they had made a joke of his intelligence, his pride, his judgment, everything. Because of that lie, he had distrusted his wife. Because of those fake tears, he had abandoned her in a storm. On the exact day of their anniversary. Because of his selfishness, his blindness, and his stupidity, he had destroyed with his own hands the happiness he had right in front of him. The guilt hit him like a tsunami, washing everything away. He had been wrong from the very beginning. He did not just owe Clara an apology. He did not just owe her an explanation. He owed her an entire life. And for the first time, he understood that there was perhaps no way to give back everything he had taken from her. The emptiness in Vance's eyes slowly began to disappear. In its place appeared a cold, relentless, dangerously calm gaze. He knew exactly what he had to do. It was not enough to clear Alara's name. He had to make the director of that whole farce pay the ultimate price. "Where is she?" he asked. His voice was so calm it was chilling. Harrison answered immediately. Mr. Sterling, Miss. Brooks is filming at Steiner Studios in Brooklyn. Vance stood up slowly. He took the file containing all the evidence. Then he placed the audio player inside a leather briefcase. Every movement was slow, controlled. But beneath that calm hid a devastating storm. Get the car ready. When Vance Sterling's wrath truly awakened, he left nothing standing. At that moment, in Brooklyn, the set was on a lunch break. Sienna was sitting in her lead actress chair in an excellent mood. Although Julian's press conference had caused problems, Blair had managed to keep the controversy alive. Public opinion remained divided. There were still people who believed Evelyn Higgins's story, and that made her feel secure. Convinced that Alara would not manage to get out of it, she smiled as she accepted a glass of water from her assistant, when suddenly the entire set stirred. Conversation stopped. All eyes turned toward the entrance. A dark blue Porsche Cayenne had just pulled up abruptly. Sienna froze, and then an explosion of joy swelled inside her. Vance had come to look for her. After several days, after cooling off, he had surely reconsidered. Her victim act had worked. She stood up quickly, adjusted her hair, smoothed her dress, and walked toward him with a radiant smile. Vance, you finally came to see me. Her voice sounded sweet, petulant. I knew you would not stay mad at me forever. She tried to hug him like she always did, but Vance took a step back, coldly. Sienna's eyes widened. She had never seen that look. There was no affection, no tenderness, only contempt. Absolute contempt. Vance? Her smile vanished. What is wrong? Vance did not answer. He opened the briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of documents, and threw them directly at her. Smack. The papers hit her face. Then they fluttered to the floor in front of dozens of actors and crew members. Bank transfers. Money movements. Irrefutable proof. What is this? Sienna stammered. Read it yourself. Vance's voice seemed to come from hell. Look at the play you paid to direct. Look at how much your fake innocence costs. Sienna looked down, and all the blood drained from her face. She stumbled backward. No, it is not true. I do not know anything. There must be a mistake. She resorted again to her favorite weapon. Tears. Vance, you have to believe me. Someone is trying to frame me. It has to be Clara. She is jealous of me. That is why. You still dare to mention her name? Vance interrupted. Every word came through gritted teeth, full of fury. He pulled out the audio player and hit play. The recording echoed across the entire set. Sienna's weak, fake voice. Vance's impatient voice. And finally, that sentence. That damn sentence. Clara Sterling. Let us see if you manage to keep him this time. Silence fell over everyone. Absolute silence. The director, the actors, the crew. No one moved. The image of the sweet, innocent Sienna Brooks was shattered into pieces in front of everyone. The woman they admired, the woman who seemed so fragile, turned out to be a ruthless manipulator. Sienna began to tremble. That recording, how had he gotten it? All the exits had disappeared. She had lost, and she had lost in the worst possible way. No, it was not like that. She shook her head desperately. Tears streamed down her cheeks. But this time, no one believed her. Not a single person. Vance stepped forward until he was face to face with her. He looked her straight in the eyes, hiding none of the disgust he felt. You did not just lie to me. His voice was a hiss full of hatred. You made a clown out of me. You used me as a weapon to hurt the woman I loved. He paused. His eyes gleamed with terrifying rage. And I am going to collect that debt with interest. Smack! The slap echoed through the studio. Loud, brutal, unforgiving. Vance used all the force he had held back for weeks. Sienna fell to the floor. Half of her face instantly reddened. The mark of his fingers appeared on her skin. The entire set was petrified. No one dared to speak. That slap, Vance said in an icy voice, is for Clara. For all the lies you made her endure. Then he leaned down slightly, brought his lips to her ear, and whispered something only she could hear. As of today, your career is finished. He straightened up, adjusted the collar of his suit as if he had just touched something repulsive, and walked away without looking back at her. Sienna remained sitting on the floor, clutching her swollen cheek. Destroyed. She looked up, but she only saw the cold back of the man she once thought she had completely under control. All around her, whispers, stares, and contempt began. It was all over. Her career, her reputation, her dreams, her relationship with Vance. It all vanished in a matter of minutes. And the next day, the truth came to light. The evidence was published in all the media. The bank transfers, the recording, Evelyn Higgins's confession after being interrogated by the police. The entire conspiracy was exposed. The name Sienna Brooks immediately became the target of public outrage. Brands, production companies, sponsors, everyone cut ties with her. The career she had built for years collapsed overnight. Alara received the news with tranquility. Her innocence had been restored, but she felt no joy, only exhaustion. The storm had passed, and the Hayes Gallery returned to its usual peacefulness. She went back to her loom, to her needles, to her threads. But this time, it was hard to concentrate. The image of Vance appearing on set, the slap, the way he had destroyed Sienna, it all kept circling in her mind. Did he do it for her? Or simply because he found out he was played? She did not know, and she did not want to know, because Vance was no longer important, not to her. At that moment, she heard heavy, familiar footsteps outside the studio. She looked up. Vance stood there by the door. He no longer had that arrogance that had always accompanied him. His suit was slightly wrinkled. His face showed exhaustion. Dark circles marked sleepless nights. And his eyes were full of guilt, of pain, of vulnerability, something she had never seen. Alara put the needle down on the table. She was not surprised or scared. She simply waited. The silence became unbearable. It seemed as though Vance needed to gather all his strength to speak. His voice sounded hoarse, tense. I came to ask for your forgiveness. Alara did not answer. She just watched him. Vance took a few steps inside slowly, as if every movement weighed tons. He stopped at a respectful distance, and then something unthinkable happened. The powerful CEO bowed his head, a sincere, genuine bow. Clara. He looked up. I am sorry. He looked her straight in the eyes. I read your diary. It was all my fault. He took a deep breath. Forgive me for forgetting our anniversary. Forgive me for not trusting you. Forgive me for my selfishness, for my indifference, for all the pain I caused you during these 3 years. His voice began to break. And forgive me for abandoning you that night on the interstate. Every apology seemed to tear a piece of his soul. He was not trying to justify or defend himself. He was simply confessing his sins. Alara listened in silence. If those words had arrived a month earlier, maybe she would have cried. Maybe she would have forgiven him. Because for years she had longed to hear them. But now, she felt nothing. Her heart remained still, serene, like a lake without a single ripple. She stood up, walked over to the teapot, and poured herself a cup of chamomile tea. The aroma helped keep her grounded. Vance, she finally said. Her voice was calm, but distant, very distant. Do you know something? She held the cup in her hands. Wounds of the body eventually heal, no matter how deep they are. Maybe they leave scars, but they heal. She turned to look at him. Wounds of the heart are different. Her eyes were clear, without hate, without resentment. I heard your apology. But it cannot cure those scars. She paused. It cannot give me back that night in the rain. It cannot give me back the 3 years I spent waiting for a man who never looked back. She set the cup on the table and uttered the words that ultimately destroyed him. It is too late. It was not a reproach. It was not an accusation. Just a truth. A simple, cruel, irrefutable truth. Vance stood frozen. He had been prepared for rage, for screaming, for hate, even for a slap. He could withstand all that. What he could not withstand was that calm. The calm of someone who no longer felt anything for him. Despair hit him harder than anything else. Much harder than discovering Sienna's betrayal. Because he understood something. There are things that, once lost, never return. It does not matter how much money you have, how much power, how many apologies you offer. Clara, he tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. Mr. Sterling? Alara interrupted him. Her tone was polite, but firm. If you have nothing else to say, please leave. That was a definitive goodbye. I have work to do. She sat back down, took up her loom again, and the needle began to glide over the silk as if the man behind her did not exist, as if he were air. Vance stood perfectly still for a few seconds, watching that slender, firm, unreachable back. And finally, he understood something. The door to her heart had been closed, and he had been the one to close it with his own hands. Now there was no key capable of opening it. However, that refusal did not destroy him. On the contrary, it awakened within him an unknown determination. He understood that empty apologies were useless. He had made too many mistakes. He had hurt her too much. If he wanted to show remorse, he would have to do it through actions. He would have to learn to truly love and win back the woman he had lost. The problem was that Vance Sterling had never chased anyone. He was a man used to being followed, to being obeyed. He had absolutely no idea how to win back a woman. And so began a phase full of clumsy, awkward, and ridiculously disastrous attempts. The next morning, an elegant Maybach stopped in front of the Hayes Gallery. Vance stepped out of the vehicle, carrying a massive breakfast basket from Balthazar, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. He believed that all women loved expensive gestures. When Alara came out for her morning walk, she encountered that scene. She stopped and stared at him in surprise. "I brought you breakfast," Vance said as he offered her the basket. He looked uncomfortable, almost nervous. "I did not know what you liked, so I bought a little of everything." Inside was caviar, foie gras, French croissants, absurdly sophisticated items for a regular morning. Alara looked at the basket, then looked at him, and replied calmly, "Thank you, Mr. Sterling, but in the mornings I only have black coffee and toast, nothing else." And she kept walking, passing right by him, as if nothing had happened. Vance stood frozen, holding that wildly expensive, completely out-of-place basket, and it was then he realized something painful. After 3 years of marriage, he did not even know his wife's favorite breakfast. His first failure was absolute, but he did not give up. He simply moved to the next strategy, waiting. Every afternoon, after work, Vance's Porsche appeared parked on a corner across from the Hayes Gallery. He did not go in, he did not try to approach. He simply sat in his car, silently watching the window of Alara's studio. He waited until the lights went out, until she left, and then he drove away. In his mind, that was a discreet way of showing care, of protecting her. But the reality was very different. The constant presence of a luxury car and the repeated appearance of the famous CEO of the Sterling Corporation soon caught the attention of the entire neighborhood. Rumors began to circulate. Mr. Sterling is trying to win back his ex-wife. The artist Alara and the CEO are getting back together. I bet they will reconcile. That gossip ended up causing exactly the opposite of what Vance intended. Alara began to feel uncomfortable, pressured, watched. One afternoon, Julian personally walked out of the gallery, went up to the car, and gently tapped on the window. "Mr. Sterling, can we speak for a moment?" Both men stood face to face on the sidewalk. Julian maintained his usual elegance, his courtesy, his calm. "Mr. Sterling, I understand what you are trying to do," he began. "But your methods are causing problems for Alara. She needs peace," Vance replied immediately, coldly. "What happens between her and me does not concern you, Mr. Hayes." Julian did not react. He did not even flinch. "Perhaps," he answered serenely. "But currently, Alara is part of the Hayes Gallery, and I have the responsibility to protect her privacy and her peace." He observed him for a few seconds. "If you truly want to make it up to her, you should find another way. One that does not put her in an uncomfortable position." Those words were like a bucket of ice water. Vance understood something he had ignored until then. Once again, he was acting thinking only of himself, trying to express his feelings without asking how she felt. After that conversation, he stopped waiting for her publicly. He began to use what he knew best: his influence, his contacts, his ability to solve problems. Secretly, he looked into the needs of Alara's studio and discovered something important. She was trying to source a very rare type of vintage silk thread, an indispensable material for her new piece. The problem was that the thread was extremely scarce, practically monopolized by a massive textile corporation. Without saying a single word, without asking for recognition, Vance utilized his entire network of contacts, pressured the company, negotiated deals, and managed to have the material sold to the Hayes Gallery at a preferential price. Days later, Alara received the news. She could not hide her surprise or her joy. Julian watched the expression of happiness that appeared on her face and smiled, though he also had an immediate suspicion. He knew perfectly well that securing that supply had not been simple. Alara guessed it too, but neither of them said anything. She did not directly thank him for the help, but she also did not reject it. And for the first time, an action by Vance was not annoying. It did not pressure her. It did not embarrass her. He did not try to buy her feelings. He simply solved a real problem, one that directly affected her work. Sitting in his office, Vance looked at the report confirming the delivery of the material. A strange mix of emotions rose within him. He had not received thanks. He had not received smiles, not even a glance. And yet, knowing he had helped Alara, knowing her career was continuing to advance, brought him an unexpected satisfaction. A feeling better than closing a multi-million-dollar contract. For the first time, he understood something. Winning someone over is not about showing off expensive things. It is about quietly doing what they really need. He still had a long, difficult road ahead, but at least he had found the right direction. That night, the Hayes Gallery plunged once again into its usual serenity. The moonlight pierced the branches of the oak trees, reflecting on the pond where the koi fish swam. The air was steeped in the sweet scent of late-blooming flowers. After dinner, Alara and Julian were strolling through the small garden. It had been a long time since she had experienced such peace. There were no conspiracies, no dramas, no fear. The scandal was over, the responsible parties had paid, and her life seemed to have found a new balance. "How is the new peace coming along?" Julian asked. His voice blended with the tranquility of the night. "Almost finished," Alara replied with a soft smile. "Luckily you found that supplier for the vintage silk." She said it casually, but both knew perfectly well who was truly responsible. Julian stopped by the pond, watched the ripples on the water, and spoke with absolute sincerity. "It seems Mr. Sterling is truly trying to change." There was no jealousy in his voice, nor resentment, just an objective observation, a truth both had perceived. Julian respected Alara too much to manipulate her, and he trusted she was smart enough to make her own decisions. She stayed quiet, her fingers tensed slightly, because it was true. She was not blind. She had seen Vance's efforts, his clumsy attempts, his mistakes, his small, sincere gestures. And although she tried to ignore them, although she tried to stay cold, something inside her was beginning to stir. Small cracks were appearing in the wall of ice she had built. Very small, but real. Julian watched her for a few seconds and finally made a decision. If he did not speak tonight, perhaps he would never have another chance. "Alara," he called her. Then he softly shook his head. He corrected himself. "Clara." She looked up, surprised. It caught her off guard. The name Clara was tied to painful memories, to a period of suffering, to the weak woman she had tried to leave behind. But when Julian said it, it did not sound like a wound. It did not sound like a condemnation. It sounded like acceptance, as if he embraced every version of her. The artist, the wife, the broken woman, and the woman who had stood back up. "I cannot erase your past," Julian said sincerely. "And Vance can probably offer you a life of luxury that I will never be able to match." His eyes remained locked on hers. "But there is something I can give you." He took a step forward, just enough so she could see her reflection in his eyes. "I can give you respect. I can give you understanding. I can give you a place where you can be Alara without constantly having to monitor someone else's mood." His voice grew even softer. "I can give you a home where your art and your soul will always be the most important things." He took a deep breath and finally said the words he had been holding on to for so long. They were not grandiose, they were not dramatic, just sincere. "Clara, let me take care of you." The world seemed to stop. Julian's confession carried no demands, no pressure. It was like a warm current slowly running through a tired heart. She stood frozen, because she felt something for him. She respected him, she admired him, and maybe she had even begun to fall in love with him. He had been the one who rescued her when she was destroyed, who helped her find herself again, who believed in her when not even she could. The idea of sharing a quiet life with Julian was beautiful, tempting, safe. But then another image appeared. Vance. His tormented gaze, his desperate attempts to change, his clumsiness, his regret. And the old wound in her heart throbbed again, like a sensitive scar when the weather changes. She was at a crossroads. On one hand was Julian, representing the present, stability, peace. On the other was Vance, representing the past, the pain, and also the possibility of redemption. "Julian," her voice trembled slightly. She looked down, confused. "I need time." Julian saw the uncertainty reflected in her eyes and smiled sweetly, without applying pressure. "It is okay. I can wait." He took a step back, respecting her space. "Just remember something." His gaze was warm, sincere. "There will always be someone here waiting for you." That confession dropped like a stone onto a calm lake. The ripples continued to expand long after the conversation ended. And that night, Alara was unable to find any peace. Days later, The Museum of Modern Art in New York was finalizing preparations for one of the most important events of the year. Alara was one of the featured artists, and she was personally overseeing the installation of her new work, a massive woven tapestry titled Times the Golden Aviary. Majestic, exquisite, the result of months of work. Julian stood by her side, helping her with the lighting details, the angles, the layout of the exhibit. His presence gave her tranquility, but the confession from that night still occupied her thoughts. She tried to push all those emotions aside and focus solely on the work. Then, something unexpected happened. Vance appeared, dressed in an impeccable dark suit. His arrival immediately drew everyone's attention. He ignored the stares, ignored the whispers, and walked straight toward her. "I heard you finished a new piece." He tried to sound casual, but his eyes revealed too much, especially seeing her next to Julian. Alara felt an immediate discomfort. "Thank you for your interest, Mr. Sterling," she replied coldly. "But we are working. This is not a good time for visitors." Vance seemed not to hear the rejection. His attention shifted to the massive tapestry, and he was struck. That piece reflected confidence, freedom, pride. It was the expression of a woman who had reclaimed her soul, a woman completely different from the wife he thought he knew. Regret struck him again. "Clara, can we—" He did not get to finish the sentence. A metallic screech tore through the air. Sharp, violent. Everyone looked up. Above them, a massive lighting rig was being moved by the crew. For some reason, one of the safety bolts snapped. The structure lost stability, tilted, and plummeted directly toward where Alara was standing. It all happened in a fraction of a second. "Alara!" Julian screamed, running toward her, but he was too far away. He would not make it in time. Alara was paralyzed. Her body stopped responding. She could only watch that mass of metal hurtling down on her. Her mind went completely blank. And then, it happened. "Clara!" Vance's voice echoed across the room. Without thinking, without hesitating, without calculating, everything vanished. The pride, the regret, the guilt. Only one thing remained, the most primal instinct. To protect the woman he loved, he lunged forward and used all his strength to shove her out of the trajectory. At the same moment, the structure crashed down. Crash! The roar shook the entire building. Alara fell to the floor, safe. But when she turned her head, her blood froze. Vance lay pinned under the debris. The structure had trapped part of his back and his left arm. Blood began to spread rapidly, dyeing his white shirt red. "Oh my God! Call an ambulance! Hurry!" Screams erupted everywhere. Julian and several workers rushed to lift the structure. Alara stood up, stumbling. Her whole body was shaking. She ran toward him and dropped to her knees by his side. "Vance!" Her voice broke. "Vance!" The fear she felt was so intense she did not even recognize it. Vance opened his eyes with difficulty. He looked at her, and in his gaze, there was no longer any possessiveness left. No arrogance, no pride, only concern and tenderness. He tried to smile, but the pain made him wince. "Clara," he murmured with a weak voice. His breathing was ragged. And yet, he asked a single question. "Are you okay?" Just that. Nothing more. The only thing he cared about was knowing she was safe. Alara's tears began to fall uncontrollably, heavy, silent. All the barriers she had built collapsed in that instant, because that act had not been calculated. It was not an attempt to win her back. It was not a strategy. It was pure instinct. The decision to sacrifice everything for her. And as the ambulance sirens approached in the distance, Alara heard nothing. She could only look at the man lying in a pool of blood and wonder why the pain she felt in that moment was so unbearably profound. A deeply complex emotion surged in Alara's chest and wrapped around her entirely. It was shock. It was fear. And it was also a painful spark of love. A love she believed dead a long time ago, and that suddenly seemed to breathe once again. The VIP room at Mount Sinai Hospital in Manhattan was immersed in a silence so deep you could hear the tick-tock of the wall clock and the steady beep of the heart monitor. The faint scent of disinfectants mixed with the delicate perfume of white orchids placed in a corner. Everything was elegant, impeccable, exclusive, but nothing could dispel the heavy feeling of coldness hovering in the air. Vance had woken up after a multi-hour surgery. His left arm was fractured and remained immobilized. A metal bar had pierced his back. Luckily, it had missed his spine. However, it had left him with a deep wound and multiple contusions. Lying in the bed, He looked like a completely different person. His face, which normally radiated authority and dominance, was pale. His lips looked dry, and for the first time in a long time, he seemed vulnerable. Human. Alara sat by the bed. She held a small paring knife. She peeled an apple with slow, precise movements. The peel fell, forming a long, perfect spiral without breaking. Her hands moved with the same concentration with which she wove a piece of art. She had been there for 2 days and 2 nights. From the moment Vance was rushed into the ER, she had not left his side. Julian had also come to visit him. He had stood by the door for a few seconds, watching Alara as she peeled the apple, then watching the man sleeping in the bed. He did not say much. He just left a fruit basket on a table and, before leaving, said one single thing to her. "Clara, listen to your heart. Whatever your decision is, I will always respect it." She understood perfectly what those words meant. Julian's confession was still present. The promise of a quiet life, of a serene future. But right now, her heart was a chaos impossible to order. Vance moved slightly. His eyelashes fluttered, and slowly, he opened his eyes. At first, his vision was blurry. Then it began to focus, stopping on her profile. He saw the exhaustion on her face, the small shadows under her eyes, and something inside him contracted painfully. "Clara." His voice came out hoarse, weak, barely a whisper. Alara's hands stopped. She looked up. Their eyes met. For a few seconds, neither said anything. The room seemed to hold its breath. "You woke up." She set the apple aside. Her voice was calm. It was no longer laden with ice like before. "Do you want some water?" Carefully, she helped him sit up. She placed a pillow behind his back. Then she brought a glass of warm water with a straw. Vance drank a few sips without taking his eyes off her. That attention, that tenderness, how long had he gone without appreciating it? No, the real question was different. How long had he gone without realizing the value she held? "Why are you here?" he asked quietly. "Where is Julian?" He knew perfectly well that Julian was the one who had the right to be by her side. He had some business to take care of. Alara replied, avoiding going deeper. "You were hurt saving me. Me being here taking care of you is the right thing to do. The right thing to do." Those words provoked a bitter smile from Vance, a smile that made the wound on his back ache. Alara did not answer. She finished cutting the apple into small pieces. She pierced one with a silver fork and offered it to him. Vance did not take it. Instead, he stared at her with a painful sincerity. "Clara, can we talk?" Not as the CEO of the Sterling Corporation, just as Vance Sterling, your husband. The word times husband times dropped between them with immense weight. Alara shuddered slightly, but she did not refuse. She placed the plate on the table and stayed silent, waiting. "I read your diary," he began with difficulty. "I know everything. I know that night was our anniversary. I know you waited for me." Every word hit directly at the cracks in his heart. "I have no excuses," he continued. "I was arrogant. I was selfish. I got so used to your sacrifices that I came to believe they were an obligation. I never tried to truly understand you." He lowered his head. Guilt weighed heavily on every syllable. "Sienna manipulated me, but that justifies nothing. The one responsible was me. I did not value the treasure I had right in front of me." Instinctively, he tried to reach out his hand to take hers, but he stopped halfway, as if feeling he no longer had the right. "I killed Alara." His voice broke. "I turned her into a simple Mrs. Sterling, and then I cruelly abandoned that Mrs. Sterling." He took a deep breath. "I do not deserve your forgiveness." Tears began to slide down Alara's cheeks, but she was not crying for him or out of pity. She was crying for the Clara from 3 years ago, the woman who loved too much, the woman who waited too long. "These words," she murmured. Her voice choked. The Clara of the past waited for them for a long time. Vance closed his eyes. A hot tear ran down his face. I know it is too late. But..." Alara opened her eyes again. "I am not asking you to forgive me. I am only asking for a chance to make it up to you, a chance to learn to love you again, to love both Clara and Alara." His voice was barely a whisper. "I can do it." For the first time in years, they had a sincere conversation. No misunderstandings, no lies, no masks. Just a man confessing his sins and a woman facing the scars of her past. Alara did not answer. She simply raised her hand and gently wiped away the tear running down Vance's cheek. A small, light gesture, but enough to make his whole body tremble. Maybe forgiveness was not a decision. Maybe it was a process. And that process had just begun in that quiet hospital room. A month later, Vance was discharged. The wound on his back had scarred, leaving a long mark. His arm was no longer in a sling, although he still needed physical therapy. Those scars would probably stay with him his whole life as permanent reminders of his mistakes. During that month, Alara remained by his side. She was not especially affectionate, but neither was she distant. She took care of him like someone still trying to figure out her own feelings. The relationship between them remained suspended in a fragile uncertainty. Neither dared to break the balance. The divorce papers were still waiting at the lawyer's office, neither cancelled nor finalized. On the day of his discharge, Alara packed her things. She planned to return to the Hayes Gallery, but Vance stopped her. "Could you come somewhere with me?" he asked. It did not sound like an order. It sounded like a plea. She looked into his eyes, and after a few seconds, she nodded. Vance drove personally. He no longer used the Porsche Cayenne. He now drove a sleek black Bentley. Curiously, the same color as Julian's car. Perhaps that too reflected how much he had changed. The car moved forward in silence. Alara watched the scenery out the window without asking where they were going. But when the vehicle merged onto the ramp for Interstate 95, her heart flipped. She knew exactly where they were heading. That highway had been her worst nightmare. But this time, there was no storm. The sky was clear. The sun shone brightly, and everything seemed peaceful. Everything had changed. Except the road. Vance slowed down. He stayed quiet, focused. Finally, he pulled the car onto the shoulder. It was the exact same spot. The spot where months ago he had kicked her out into the freezing rain. Alara clenched her hands. The memories rushed back, but there was no longer despair, just a profound sadness. Vance turned off the engine, stepped out of the car, and walked around to her door. He opened it like a true gentleman, something he had never done during their 3 years of marriage. Then he extended his hand toward her. Palm open, firm, marked by small scars. "Clara." His voice was soft, incredibly soft. "Step out of the car." Alara looked at that hand. Then she looked into his eyes, full of nervousness, of hope, of fear. After a few seconds of silence, she placed her hand on his. Vance held it firmly, carefully, as if holding something infinitely valuable. He helped her step down, and they stood together on the shoulder. As the cars sped past, the breeze ruffled her hair. Vance continued to hold her hand with no intention of letting go. He looked her straight in the eyes and spoke. "Clara." His voice was thick with emotion. "I did not bring you here to reopen your wounds." He took a deep breath. "I brought you here because this is the place where I made the biggest mistake of my life, and I wanted to be standing exactly here to ask you for something." His eyes shone sincere, vulnerable. "Give me a chance," his voice cracked. "Let me personally take you home, and let us start over from the very beginning. Will you?" It was not a spectacular promise. It was not a grandiose declaration. It was a humble request, the plea of a man who finally understood what he had lost. Tears filled Alara's eyes. She looked at the man in front of her, the man who had once made her suffer so much she wished to disappear, and also the man who had risked his life to save hers. She saw true regret. She saw change. She saw growth. The ice wall around her heart had melted long ago. The scars would still be there, probably forever. But perhaps she was ready to live with them and let them heal. She did not answer immediately. She did not say yes. But she also did not pull her hand away. She simply curled her fingers around Vance's hand and squeezed gently. A small gesture, but full of meaning. Forgiveness, hope, and the silent promise of a future still waiting to be written. The road ahead of them would still be difficult. There would still be challenges. There would still be wounds to heal. But this time, they would not be alone. They would walk together, starting over, right in the spot where they once stumbled. The golden setting sun illuminated their figures, and their shadows stretched out over the asphalt, as if destiny were drawing the very first stroke of an entirely new story.